Hi, and welcome to the Human Side of Business podcast. I'm Ange McCabe, CEO and co-founder of Intuitive Performance. I'm a performance coach, HR professional, whole person leadership facilitator, and your host. The Human Side of Business podcast is fueled by the genuine curiosity to understand how personal characteristics and skills can be leveraged to drive individual and team performance, tangible outcomes, and ultimately organizational success within business. Each podcast is devoted to sharing knowledge, expanding our learning edges, and exploring the trends in corporate culture towards growing the emotional intelligence of organizations. I'm so glad you're here. Hi, and a warm welcome to Dr. Cynthia P. LeMay. We're so happy to have you here on the Human Side of Business podcast show today, Cynthia. How's it going?
It's going well. Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yes, absolutely. And so everyone, I'd like to give a warm welcome to Dr. Cynthia LeMay and just a little bit of a background on where she's meeting us today. So she's a senior level researcher with over 30 years of executive and consulting experience. She focuses on conflict resolution strategies, intergenerational conflict, and the millennial generation. She has earned a lifetime certification as a senior professional in human resources from the Society for Human Resource Management and is a certified mediator. Cynthia also holds a PhD from Kennesaw State University in USA, where she teaches in the business school while continuing her consulting and training business. When we're talking about her training and consulting business, I'll let her introduce that because she can speak better to it. But basically, it's focused on how to effectively manage intergenerational organizations. Cynthia also has a book titled Millennials and Conflict in the Workplace, Understanding the Unique Traits of the Now Generation. And this was published this year in 2023. So basically, her book unravels the mysteries and confusion surrounding millennials. And they are now the largest group in the labor force, and their presence redefines the workplace for many organizations. So what we're going to get into today with Dr. Cynthia is talking about the environment leaders can create to support intergenerational workers and workplaces. So Cynthia, help us understand this whole definition around generations and what it means to our workplaces.
Yes, as you mentioned, there are 5 generations in the workplace when you think of that. And we know from our research that each generation has unique traits and characteristics based on the environment in which they were raised. So starting with the baby boomers were born 1946 to 1964. Today, they're aged 59 to 77, so still quite a few baby boomers in the workforce. Following them are what we call the Gen X generation, 65 to 81. So today, they're 42 to 58. Millennials, the big generation, they were born by my definition, which was the U.S. Census Bureau definition, 1982 to 2000. What I would tell you is, as a generation forms, those beginning and end dates are not definitive. So we actually work towards looking at what those are going to be. But so we're using 82 to 2000 right now. And that's followed by Gen Z, which would be the generation that's going to be coming after millennials. So they're probably aged like 60 to 22 today. So, when we look at it, and then the silent generation who are 78 to 98 today. So there are not that many silents in the workplace, but potentially up to, a million or so silents. So we've got about 73 million baby boomers, about 71 million Gen Xers, about 67 million Gen Z, but we have 85 million millennials in the workplace. So it's a brand new organizational culture that millennials are bringing into the workplace, and they will remain the majority until about 2041. So quite a long period of time where they're going to be the majority in the workplace. So very different generation than previous generations, very different ways of managing conflict. They're looking for different things in an environment to get them to stay. So it's a very different workplace that we're looking at today.
Definitely. And so how do the Gen X, Gen Z, and the Generation Alpha kind of fall into this when you're talking about having, 5 to 7 generations under the proverbial roof?
and I'm not sure what you mean by fall into it, but they each come with their own conflict styles, their own ways of addressing things. I think an important thing to look at is our employee engagement continues to decrease. We only have 32% of actively engaged employees. So you're looking at your workforce, it's like about a third of them are actively engaged. 18% are actively disengaged, just really totally disengaged from their work. And we know that for younger employees, those numbers are the highest, that they are the most disengaged and the most likely to be engaged in the workplace. So I think what we're looking at is, how do these people resolve, how do these employees work? What are they looking for? I would tell you that about 36% of millennials and Gen Zs will reject a job based on personal ethics. So for younger generations, what's very important for them in the workplace is it's more than financial gain. They're looking for working for employees where they feel like they have a purpose, that they're contributing to society overall.
Absolutely.
And adding to social problem, adding to addressing social problems. So that's a huge deal for our younger generation. That's one main thing they're looking for in the workplace. Thinking about conflict styles, they all resolve conflict differently. Gen Z is still forming, so we don't have solid research yet because some of them are still very young. But looking at millennials are more likely, by my statistical analysis, to avoid conflict. They're more likely to just be conflict avoidant. Now, when you look at Gen X, they're more likely to compete. Gen X was the latchkey, independent generation. Millennials had more the helicopter parenting, and baby boomers are more likely, by my analysis, to collaborate, which means they're assertive but cooperative. So you've got not only different traits and characteristics, you have these different conflict styles all in the workplace, sort of fighting each other with different ways of approaching things. And so they're all looking for different things in the workplace.
Yeah. And what's really coming up for me, it's relatable to behavioral styles. So when we're talking about behavioral styles specifically, not to go offline here, Cynthia, but just presenting a comparison, oftentimes what we look to neutralize tensions or create a win-win situation is adapting to the same. So I think what I'm hearing here is when it comes to the intergenerational working, as leaders, we have a responsibility to understand more about, to your example, the millennials, because they're the largest bunch right now and will be for quite some time, and understand what they need by place of curiosity or adaptation.
Right. Millennials, if you kind of look at the main three in the workforce, which are the millennials, the Gen X, and the baby boomers, millennials, when they're looking at a job, they like benefit choice. It's very important to them to have paid time off.
Yep.
They want to know why. They're very questioning. They're the most highly educated group in the workforce. So I talked to a lot of employers, and my research has included numerous interviews and focus groups with millennials and non-millennials, as well as a statistical analysis of the conflict styles of 11,000 participants, both millennials and non-millennials. So a lot of research around that. What we found is millennials, they like to question, they like to ask why. And when I talk to different managers in the workplace, they say, when I ask a baby boomer or Gen X to do something, they go off and do it. When I ask a millennial, I'm more likely to hear why. Why are we doing it? What do we need to do? But, we've taught them critical thinking. We like, critical thinking is a positive thing. And so it's important, I think, for people to understand, what they're doing, why they're doing it, see the big picture. That's very important to millennials. Millennials desire feedback. They want to know how they're doing. They have very high expectations, and they'll leave if not satisfied. They want flexibility, flexible work hours, and minimal conflict. They don't like conflict. Gen X is more about salary, how much pay are they making, and work-life balance. They want more vacation time. They're interested in a 401k plan. They're very self-reliant. They do not want to be micromanaged. So with Gen X, you can leave them to do a task and they're perfectly happy. When you get to the baby boomers, they're very interested in how much the pay is going to be in their health insurance, retirement plans. They have a very strong work ethic. They are very interested in visibility in what they do. So, you've got these different generations. And so the goal is to understand the different conflict styles, understand the different communication styles. Younger generations tend to be more indirect in their communication. It may be more texting, more email, whereas older generations tend to have more direct communication. So that's one of the things. Younger generations are more tech savvy, and in older generations, maybe not so tech savvy. And then younger generations are more questioners, and older generations are more doers. So I think that the strategy becomes, how do we create this environment that's going to be positive, where everyone can work harmoniously? Because all of these generations bring great attributes.
Absolutely.
I think that's what to keep in mind. All of them together can create a much better workplace than one generation alone. And so if you're able to create a positive workplace culture, a culture that looks at, allowing input, allowing questioning, allowing employees to talk back and forth, that is going to create a lot of positivity. If an employer provides recognition, and I think some of the things the older generations are learning from the younger generations, they're liking and they're benefiting from this increased, recognition. We've had this annual performance review for years and years. Almost everyone I talk to hates it. I worked in resources for years. You wait till the end of the year and then you get this review and everybody's panicked about it. A lot of companies now are going to this performance app where you can get feedback more frequently. That's something that was, instituted by the desire for younger generations, but the whole workforce is benefiting from that. So that's great.
Sorry, Cynthia, for our listeners, can you explain a little bit more about what this performance app is, or what that could look like?
Yeah, there's several different ones out there. There's Trackstar, there's PerformYard, there's several different ones. And it's an app that you have on your phone, and it has preset goals. So they're preset goals. So you sit down with your manager, you understand what your goals are going to be for the year. And then the employee, though, can request feedback. Now, you have to set parameters. You don't want your employee requesting feedback every day, but you can set parameters where they can request feedback and say, hey, I completed this project last week. Can you tell me how it went, or how, it's one of my deliverables. And so because of this, it allows people to understand more throughout the year, because we know when we hear something closer to when we do it, it's much more effective feedback. So this allows them to hear closer to when they did something, how they did. Companies like GE, who for years had the annual performance that was called the rank and yank.
Yes.
They would rank you, and then unless you were like in the top so many, you knew it was time to leave. So that was a big thing. They've even gone to this type of performance app where you can actually have it on your phone, and you have more frequent communication with your direct supervisor as far as how you're going. So it's really been a positive for the entire workforce.
And so looking at it from the flip side of things, so we know that when it comes to leadership, connecting the organizational stuff to the actual leadership skills can sometimes be looked at in segregation when it's actually intertwined. How are you finding, in your experience or by research, leaders, when it comes to these types of performative apps and feedback mechanisms, how are they making out with them? Is it something that's, welcomed at both ends of things, or are leaders a little bit more resistant because it's quote unquote adding more work potentially?
I think that, because of the positive outcomes, that it's been more accepted. I do think that older generations tend to be more resistant. And that's one of the things I heard in all my interviews and focus groups, is that whereas millennials are flexible, they describe older generation as rigid and resisting. So I think initially there has been a little bit of apprehension, about this app and what it's going to, what it's going to cause. But consider that versus someone knocking on your door, every other day asking for feedback. So when you consider the alternative and consider how you're addressing that, I think I think after a period of time, it's realized how effective these apps can be.
Definitely, for sure. As a sidebar question, I'm super curious to understand, what I guess, what fueled your passion around researching this arena?
Yeah. Yeah. I worked in the corporate world for several years. I started out in human resources, moved into senior management, and I saw a lot of divisive, a lot of people that just did not get along in the workplace, a lot of unhappy workers, a lot of turnover with younger employees. And I really wanted to understand, what was behind it, understand these different characteristics and traits of the different or generations in the workplace, but more
Yes.
importantly, understand how to create a more harmonious workplace that can be effective. So I deal with companies that have a lot of conflict in the workplace, may have a lot of turnover. And when I work with them, we work to identify, understanding with employees, we take tests and we understand, how do you communicate? What's your communication style? What's your conflict style? What are the cultural behavioral norms of your organization? What would you like those norms to be? So we look at all these things, and then we work intergenerationally to find out what's the best way for us to have an environment we enjoy, and that is going to be the most effective, and that we get along, and that we're productive, and that we're meeting as many needs as we can.
Yeah, that resonates definitely. And Dr. Cynthia, tell us more about when it comes to stigmas around the different generations, right? So oftentimes you hear the most about baby boomers versus millennials for the most part in the workplace from an HR scope. But from your seat, how can you advise us to let go of some of those stigmas and get into that place of being curious around how to adapt and have an intergenerational workplace free of conflict?
Yeah. And the first thing I do in some of my training is I talk about the different generations, and then I ask the audience, we know that there are stereotypes. Some of them are true. Some of them are completely false, but they are what we believe about a generation. So I may ask, how would you, what one word would you use to define baby boomers? I hear, confident, ambitious, workaholics. And then I say, well, how would you define Gen X, latchkey, the forgotten generation? And then when we get to millennials, we hear entitled, lazy, job hoppers. We notice that that what we say typically about millennials, and millennials self-reported in my interviews that they feel defensive, they feel judged.
Yes.
That they are the most judged generation, and that we understand that a lot of these stereotypes are just simply not true. So I think breaking them out, putting them out there and saying, how many of these are true and how many are not. Now, when we break down entitled, what does that really mean? It means that they have high expectations. So would you rather have employees working for you that had low expectations or high expectations?
Right.
There's a lot of positive in there, but the way sometimes it's presented. So I think the first step is understanding, breaking down those stereotypes, understanding, what we really mean by those, and really embracing what the talents and the abilities that these different generations have. The younger generations are the most most highly educated, great critical thinking. There was one company that had put out bids to have an internal website built, and the bids were coming back at $1 million. And they had a group of younger millennials who said, "Hey, wait, we can do that." They did it for $250 million. Saved that company $750 million. So, the ability to really understand and appreciate now, and there are things that the older generations can do that are incredibly helpful based on their knowledge and their understanding of the big picture and the processes. So, and then their willingness to be more collaborative and cooperative. So, when you put all these things together and you understand them, I think that you get, the most effective workplace.
Definitely. And so for our listeners that are in the leadership seat or in an HR seat within their organization, what are the things that they need to focus on around the how-to set their teams up for success around these topics?
Yeah, I think overall, it's creating a positive culture. And some of that may resonate directly from your vision and your mission. Really understanding what your company wants, have a culture that you can, that's open to having input and questions, providing recognition, having open communication. And it doesn't just mean listening, it means seeking to understand, to really try to ask questions, embrace diversity. The silent generation, when the silent generation was age 22 to 37, 84% were non-Hispanic white. For the younger generations, about 50% are ethnic or racial minorities. So really understanding diversity and embracing it, and understanding what that brings to the table, ensuring manageable workloads. And I think the biggest thing that I try to encourage people is be creative. So someone may say, I've been here for a month. I think I should be promoted. I think I've done all this stuff and I've learned everything. Well, you can't promote someone after a few months, but you can talk to them about their interests, and you can say, well, would you like to lead this task force? You could say, I have this need and I've been thinking about doing a task force.
Right.
Would you be willing to lead this task force? Now, I'm not talking adding more work without pay. I'm talking about finding interest in using those. And then also, I think another thing besides being creative is engaging in social causes of interest across the organization, finding out what really resonates with your employees, and make sure that you engage in those so that leaders understand how to do that.
And I guess layering into a further question, Dr. Cynthia, and past what I've heard from an HR perspective, it's beneficial to have mentorship paths and reverse mentorship paths, meaning that, our baby boomers are mentoring our silent generation and our Gen X's, and vice versa. From your seat, what's your take on that approach?
I do like mentorship. I think it's very important. I think intergenerational mentorship is also very important. What I particularly like, though, are task force comprised of different generations. So very small task force that are working on a specific area of interest where you have
the same common goal.
A common goal.
Yeah.
You have different generations and they're working together on it. So you're not just mentoring them, you're actually engaged in a project. You have something you're all passionate about and you're working on that together, and you have a deliverable and you're trying to achieve something as a team. So I find that teamwork, more so than just strict, having a one-on-one mentor, has a very positive impact. And that's one of the things that I do encourage.
Absolutely. And so as you're starting to look at this, when we think about going back to the engagement piece, there's a lot of individuals that are not engaged in the workplace. And we have this new term coined-ish, it's newish, I should say, stayism, where you're in the workplace, but you're not really engaged. You're just kind of collecting that proverbial paycheck. Anecdotally, what are your thoughts towards that piece of it, that the intergenerational piece actually impacts engagement?
Yeah, well, I think that our workplaces have not all adapted to what younger workers are looking for. Some have done so beautifully, but others have not. So when you look at the lack of engagement, I think 40% of younger workers say they plan to quit in the next 24 months. So, if they're disengaged, they're going to quit. And a third of them would do so without another job. It doesn't matter to them whether they have another job. So I think what are the key things that you would look for having a workplace? And I can talk about a case study I did. I think that would help, with some of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But, provide flexibility. And, millennials and younger people like role innovation. They not only, but he says, well, I let them work virtually. Well, it may not just be virtual. It may be the hours they work too. Not all millennials like to work from 8 to 5 or 9 to 5. They may work better in the evening. So if you have the ability to be flexible in hours, provide a learning environment. Younger workers want to continue to learn and grow. That's
absolutely.
Key. And don't put them in a training room and lecture to them all day. But if you can have really good training that's interactive, and I work with companies to set up that type of training, where it's very interactive. Millennials want to drive change. So provide mechanisms for input, not just a suggestion box, but some committee or some way where you can look at these suggestions and really work through them. And providing the feedback, and I think that's key. So all those things, I think, are things managers can look at to create this environment.
Absolutely. And you'd mentioned a business case study that was kind of top of mind that surrounded this topic. Would love to hear it.
Yeah, great. Well, there's one, it was a technology company in the Southeast that I work with. The average age of the senior managers was 58. So,
Mhm.
you have, older baby boomer managers. The company was struggling recruiting and retaining, mid-level, entry-level and mid-level employees. They would come and they would leave right away. There was a very hierarchical structure and defined work schedules. They did transition to virtual work during COVID, but they eliminated it, shortly after COVID was over. And, pretty much it went back to you could work virtually maybe one day a week, but that was it. So I started out by meeting with senior management. I thought, let's start here. We
Mhm.
talked about and we brainstormed strategies to engage employees and provide opportunities for input. What could they do? What changes could we make to training and development? What modifications could we make to workplace hours and structure? We made revisions to the company mission and vision. We also broadened our recruiting efforts. I felt like they just were missing a large, diverse population. And so I
Mhm.
wanted to make sure they broadened their recruiting efforts. We set up an apprenticeship program where people that were considering working there could come in and spend a day or two, really experience the workplace, and then strengthen the exit interviews to really make sure that it was something that we were collecting good data. Then I did training with employees and managers. So this was really fun because we completed the Thomas Kilmann instrument, which is a conflict style assessment.
Mhm.
It tells you
Mhm.
what your conflict style is. So everybody learned what their conflict style is. And it's funny because some of them be like, I had no idea. I thought I was this, and yet I'm that. Um, we held sessions. I did little breakout sessions on communication styles and key requirements for success, how to successfully communicate. We looked at role definition, how do you define your role? And then I'd have co-employees define their role, and we'd see how
Mhm.
different that would be.
Mhm.
And then everyone put together an action plan about what they thought they could do to create a more positive work environment. Uh,
Mhm.
and then we also did the same types of training with some of the senior managers so they could understand their conflict styles and so forth. We did a 12-month follow-up, and the turnover was significantly down and the employee morale was significantly increased. So
Amazing.
I
Mm.
think a lot of it was just that interactive training that we had with all the employees and how much they appreciated the efforts and the changes that were made. So, those training programs can really resonate with employees when they're looking at what to do. So I think that's
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I tend to agree. And I'm smiling and nodding because I mean your business case perfectly ties everything that we've just talked about today together. It's an intersystem approach is what I'm hearing.
what we found is millennials, they like to question, they like to ask why. And when I talk to different managers in the workplace, they say, when I ask a baby boomer or a Gen X to do something, they go off and do it. When I ask a millennial, I'm more likely to hear why. Why are we doing it? What do we need to do? But we've taught them critical thinking.
Mhm.
We like, critical thinking is a positive thing. And so it's important, I think, for people to understand, what they're doing, why they're doing it, see the big picture. That's very important to millennials. Millennials desire feedback. They want to know how they're doing. They have very high expectations and they'll leave if not satisfied. They want flexibility, flexible work hours, and minimal conflict. They don't like conflict.
So from the HR constructs, there's also the leadership pillar where it's ensuring that you have leadership buy-in and having them understand the different generational styles and then affording them training and development opportunities and kind of going back and forth so that I think the biggest thing that was coming out for me is that team members are feeling like they're invested in, that
Yes,
they're heard, and that they're connected with your organization.
exactly. Exactly. And I think that's part of the training was the feeling cared about,
Mm.
recognition, the recognition that you're important to us and we're going to do what we can to make sure that this is an environment that you can excel in.
Absolutely. And Dr. Cynthia, can you talk to us a little bit more about your book?
Oh, I'd love to.
Yeah.
Um, my book was just published. It was based on my research. So what was really important to me coming into this was I'd seen a lot of work on millennials and on younger generations. And it was very important to me to have empirically sound research. And so I had this database of 11,000 participants who had taken the Thomas Kilmann conflict mode instrument. So I ran numerous regression analysis on this database to really, show what those conflict styles were and how they differed. And then I also did all my interviews and research as far as interviews and focus groups. So I had, a very robust study that I did. So I took all that and I wrote a book that included all of that, but then also looked at, what are the social causes of interest to millennials? What are their political leanings? What's their diversity, and what does that mean for the future? And it was really a broad look at younger generations and what they're looking for in the workplace. So I call the millennials the now generation because, when you think about it, they grew up with a phone at their fingertips. I mean, it's like whatever they want to know something, they know it now. That can also cause a lot of stress. Because it's like, how do you turn off? How do you get to the point where you can say, I can put my phone down and I can really just take care of myself right now?
Absolutely. So. And I'm smiling broadly because towards the end of what you're identifying with your book, which is brilliant, is that even thinking about it from a different generational perspective. So for example, my dad's a baby boomer. I was never allowed my phone at the supper table ever. Yep. Yeah. And my first knee-jerk reaction, if I don't know something, then it's ask Google, right? Yeah. So it really paints that anecdotal picture around, how we can be misinterpreted and have different belief systems around how we operate.
Right. And it was published by Routledge. I was really thrilled to have such a wonderful publisher. And it's, if you go to my website, it's www.CynthiaLeMay, LEMAY. You can find a link right there to my book and a little bit more about my research and training programs. But it's really been, I also teach in the business college, but it's just been such a wonderful experience to be able to find this research and to be able to go out and work with different companies to allow them to have positive change in their workplaces. So I've really enjoyed that quite a bit.
Definitely. You sound passionate about it. And I'm encouraging all of our subscribership and listeners out there, grab this book. There's a lot of golden nuggets, and I'm sure that you will not be disappointed with some of the tidbits that you can bring back into your workplace.
Thank you. I know it ties in nicely to all the awesome work you're doing as well.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I know, Dr. Cynthia, we could chat all day about this topic. So we're both very passionate about it. But if you were to leave our listeners with one thing to think about when it comes to working with intergenerational workers, what's one thing that you would leave us with?
That if you understand the different generations in the workplace and you understand how to embrace the strengths of each of those different generations, you will have the most productive, efficient, and wonderful environments as far as your workplace to work in. I do think that the younger generations bring so many positives to the workplace. I think the older generations bring so many positives, and being able to understand those and work together will really allow the best future for us. And I really am very, very optimistic about that future.
Likewise. Thank you so much for your time today, Dr. Cynthia.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed speaking with you. Thank you for all the wonderful work you're doing.
Take good care.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Human Side of Business podcast. I'm glad you could join us. If you enjoyed today's episode and want to stay updated with our latest content, make sure to visit our website. The link can be found in the episode description, where you can subscribe to the podcast, sign up for our newsletter, and learn more about our whole person leadership services. Sounds interesting? Explore the Whole Person Leadership Cohort by Intuitive Performance, a unique program that offers unparalleled support to managers on every step of their leadership journey. Our program features evidence-based assessments, workbooks, group coaching, and interactive learning experiences to help you level up your leadership skills. Reach out today to apply to one of our upcoming cohorts. Until next time, take care and stay curious.